Sorry?
Really obvious.
Obvious, but why? Well, why? Why is it obvious? I mean, I've heard of all four of them before, but then I worked for them, so I would have done.
The two that you've ticked are more commonly known companies, a lot more common.
Why? Where are they? Why?
They're massive.
Sorry?
They're massive?
Massive? No, they're all massive. They're all
The
massive.
brands that you see daily.
This company here is a $10 billion company with 50,000 employees. I wouldn't call that titchy, okay? I wouldn't call that small.
I think it's to do with marketing.
I'm not really doing marketing. These two, you see their name on the outside of stuff, don't you? That air conditioning unit up there has got Mitsubishi written on it. Okay? Some cars, Samsung, see cars with Mitsubishi on. Okay, so they do finished products, they do end products that you see on the street. Whereas the other two only do intermediate products, they only do components. You're not going to see the name of that on the inside, that sort of thing. But these two also do components as well, they also do intermediate products. So, and most recently when I worked for these people up to 2004, I was UK sales and marketing manager. And I was responsible for about $100 million worth of business, and I had 13, 14 staff. Okay? And when I worked for these two, some of the time, about 5 years, I worked in Germany, and I've travelled all over Europe, I've travelled all over the world. But I know when I worked for Samsung, I went to 7 countries in 1 week once on business. So, international experience, management experience, and I like to think that gives me, together with this, the right to stand up here and teach you guys. Okay? And since 2004, I've done 2 things. I've done tutoring, obviously, this is why I'm here. And the other thing I've done is investing in a couple of startup companies, high-tech startup companies. That hasn't been stunningly successful, but at least I've given it a go. So that's a brief overview of who I am. We still haven't got any more students here, so okay. And the purpose of this session is, loosely speaking, critical thinking. That's what it's advertised as, yes, critical thinking. Let me just have a rough idea of who you guys are and where you're from and what we've done. So,
Nasser Yunus,
yeah,
born in the UK, family originally from Kashmir,
yeah,
35 years old, married, 5 kids, 1 on the way, plenty of work experience, mainly sales and business.
Okay, and what was your last education? What's your education?
I was a
School?
long time ago.
Yeah, okay. So you were coming back.
A-levels.
A-levels, okay.
I'm Peter.
Yeah,
I was born in Slovakia.
yeah,
I'm here also 3.5 years.
yeah.
I was most of the time I was working. Now I started college
And previous education as well?
I started IT in Slovakia, but I didn't finish because I came here.
Okay.
My name is Adila, I'm from Russia.
Yeah.
I'm 18. And after this course in OBC, I would like to get to good university. And in my future, I would like to set up my own company.
Okay. So previously you were at school? Yeah. Here or in
Russia.
My name is Jose.
Yeah.
From Brazil.
From Brazil? Yeah.
I've been 5 years here.
Yeah.
First I lived in Italy. And I'm married, I have 3 children.
Yeah.
And I started in Brazil philosophy.
And did your education, or when was your last education?
I start in philosophy, but I came here and don't start in
Some time ago. Okay. So,
My name is Tufan from Afghanistan. I've been here for the past 10 years.
yeah.
Got experience in sort of like pension companies, defense, Afghanistan, that managing supervisor for roles. Previous experience as supervisor on A-levels and national extended college.
My name is Dennis Daniel from Oxford. My parents are from St Vincent and Grenadines in West Indies. Initial working background was in policing. I was a police officer for 5 years in St Kitts.
Yeah.
In the UK, my experience has been in management, worked for a Royal Man for a number of years, Unit Logistics, Sainsbury's, retail. I also run my own business, I carry and takeaway, which I recently sold this year. Looking to possibly get back into retail, both in the graduate program, last education in high school.
Right.
I'm Charlie. I'm from Bangladesh. I finished the school from my country in science, but now I'm doing business. And I finished foundation of instrument. Now I'm studying.
Oh, okay, right, yeah, okay, right.
So, and I went to University of Harvard. So,
My name is Alina.
Yeah.
I'm 26 years old. From Kazakhstan. And physiology was in Russia.
Yeah.
Russian Academy of Economics.
Right. Okay, how long ago was that?
I graduated in 2010.
Oh, okay. Okay. So for some people, they've done this kind of stuff we do here. You've done it kind of before. For other people, the last time you did education grade level, that kind of thing at school, and there's a big difference between what we do here and what we did at school. Okay? In terms of what we expect of people to do. So. Nearly everything on these courses, as you've worked out already, is assignments rather than exams. So you need to be able to write. Unlike at school, where at school it's kind of, well, there's a straightforward answer to everything. When we start to get into the higher level stuff, it's not quite so clear, and so there's no absolute right answer. What we're really looking for is for you to be able to understand the theory and be able to apply it. Okay? Understand the theory and be able to apply it. Try and hand these things out. Stuff off. Once you're really basically. So, just to get us started. So, if we kick off with this first page, which is not really connected to the other stuff we do, but it's what covering. But it's just to, when we're doing these assignments, we have to be clear about the words that we've used. We work under Edexcel. Nearly everything we do here is under the control of Edexcel. And they set the course content and they broadly set what they want the assignments to be, but then the tutors, we narrow down the assignment to be very specific. Okay? But there's certain words that we often use when we ask you to do something. And it's worth going through what we want those to mean. okay, and what we want you to do. So there's a list here. So some of those words are, so we've got the word explain, it's a fairly common English word. What do we mean by it if it crops up in the question for an assignment? Well, like it says here, requires you to make something clear by leading the reader through some detail with a storyline. Okay, so it's a little bit like telling a story. It requires you to give reasons and provide a justification. Okay? It is not describing. Okay? That's a common mistake for people starting out doing this stuff. Describing, as I say at the bottom of the page here, I've said only rarely will an assignment ask you to describe something, usually right at the start. Even if it does, this will only be a minor part of a single task. It won't count for much. Something that I find that students quite often do, and that's why I've put it in here, do not, underline, assume that the above list of operative words can be substituted by you with the word describe. So it's not down to you to say, oh, it says explain, so what I'll do is describe. Because that will fail. Refer. So that will be, no, not good enough. Description is low-level stuff. Okay? And that's one of the commonest mistakes we keep on seeing crop up. So to describe something involves very little or no explanation, discussion, evaluation, or assessment. So it's just sort of saying, well, what I did on my holidays. You know, it's just repeating what you've seen. It doesn't count for much. There's no intellectual content. If we look at, second word, analyse. Analyse is going further than explain. Requires you to methodically examine something, usually considering from more than one angle, and often applying some theory. Okay, so analyse can mean apply some theory that you've learned in the classes. Discuss. Well, that's looking at both sides of an argument, really, looking at the for and looking at the against, possibly coming up with a conclusion. Evaluate is even stronger. It kind of follows on from analysis in some way, and it's kind of weighing things up. So evaluation. Weighing up. You might have done some analysis and then you want to go back on that analysis and go into a little bit more detail, perhaps weigh up how absolute your analysis, your conclusion might be. Quite often if you do evaluation, the word however becomes useful. So you might say, well, let me give you an example. Overdrafts. If we were looking at the usefulness of overdrafts in the company, okay, if an overdraft is a sort of loan from a bank, okay, an overdraft, but certainly in this country, overdrafts, they're not for a fixed amount of time. Okay, you don't have to use all of them. It's not like a loan of £10,000. It will be an ability to go below zero in your account, to go overdrawn up to a certain limit. And to that extent, you can say, well, theoretically, they will help you through a cash flow issue. They enable you to ease your cash flow. So they're good for helping cash flow. However, This is where the however would come in. However, they are also in this country repayable upon demand, which means the bank can, for no reason whatsoever, just suddenly phone up one day and say, we're cancelling your overdraft. We're cancelling your overdraft. So, they might be good for helping out in cash flow, they might be relatively easy to get compared with a loan, but they might kill you, okay? So, you say you run your own business, I'm sure you're aware of that already.
Never used it.
Never used it?
Never used it.
Yeah. Probably a very good idea, especially since 2008. There's even instances of companies phoning up their bank and saying, yeah, the overdraft we've got a £10,000 overdraft, can we extend that by another 5,000? And the bank says, oh, we'd forgotten you'd got an overdraft. Oh, now you've alerted us to the fact you've got one, right, we're cancelling it. And put them out of business. No, they don't care. The banks don't understand business. So, if you see they're evaluating the concept of overdraft, this idea of the word however comes in use, weighing up. Okay? The word develop requires you to lead the reader logically and methodically through a path to some sort of conclusion. So again, a little bit in more depth than analyse or discuss. If you see outline's a fairly low-level word, requires you to briefly explain. So that's not a very difficult thing to do. It's about doing something short. Review, I think that's a bit of a wishy-washy one. I don't like the word review because what exactly does that mean? But often it means discuss or evaluate, and assess is similar to evaluate. So the big message is this. If there was one thing I want you to remember from this, is none of these words on here mean describing. Okay? You can't just say, oh, what I'll do is rewrite the question in my terms and I'll just describe. Okay? Because it will not get you in. Does that help? You're clear? Yeah. If we think more specifically about critical thinking, so critical thinking, one of the pages in here if you can find it. Critical thinking, it's stuff like deciding on what to believe or do using evidence and reasoning. So we do a lot of this kind of stuff when we're doing these kind of courses. It is applying your knowledge, applying theories to a situation and deciding what you think about it and what you're going to do. Assessing the validity of a claim or argument. Somebody claims something, and you shouldn't just take it as given. For example, you read something in the newspapers. You read something in the newspapers. What are the newspapers trying to do?
Sell.
Sorry?
Sell the story.
Sell a story, yeah. Does anybody think that they're trying to tell you the truth? No. They don't have to. Legally, they don't have to. They can print, if they want, absolute rubbish. Some of them do. Like the Daily Sport and things like that. So down market newspapers talk absolute rubbish. And of course, they've got to be careful not to lie about some person and make it look, say that, I don't know, David Cameron killed someone or something. They can't do something like that because that would be illegal. But they don't have to tell the truth. And they are trying to sell newspapers. Journalists even if you read the Financial Times, the venerable Financial Times, the journalists who write in the Financial Times, are they financial people? Are they accountants? What are they? Journalists. What's the Financial Times trying to do? Pearson, same people who own Excel actually. What are they trying to do? Trying to sell newspapers. Okay? If the truth was, I think there was one day in, I think something like the 18th of April 1954, I think it's the only day recorded in history when the BBC News was cut short. It should have been half an hour, it was cut short to 15 minutes because not enough happened that day. Okay, it's the one day in history where not been any news. Would that have made a good headline in the newspaper the next day? Yesterday, not much happened. Read all about it inside. No, who the hell's going to buy that, okay? They're interested in bigging up the story. They're interested in creating controversy. They love using these very flowery words, okay? But if this is in the Financial Times, and I've asked you to look into what's happening in Tesco at the moment, for sure you'll find stories in there about Tesco. You've got to look behind the story. You've got to take out some of those words that they're trying to use to get you to read the story. And you've got to look at the facts. Okay? That's being critical. Okay? Applying what else you know about business, about theory, about Tesco. Of course, there'll be some truth in what the newspaper says. You've got to decide what's true, what's not true, what's overstated, what's the value. So, analysing and evaluating mass data and information, weighing up, conceptualising and concluding, that kind of thing. Working out what's missing. They're all possibilities. I've just made it rather than. And in terms of how you come to conclusions, you won't hear much about this, you'll probably only hear about this in this session, but there's three types of reasoning. There's deductive, there's inductive, and there is a very, very unusual word that even if you're born and bred here, you may well have never heard before, abductive. An unusual word. And deductive is where you've got some very clear theory, something very, very simple, straightforward, and you can say, well, okay, 2 plus 2 is what? 4. We know it is. We can deduce that 2 plus 2 is 4 because it's totally established theory. It's very simple. Nothing wrong with that. It works and you can lead to the conclusion. Okay? That's great if you're doing maths. A lot of the time on the courses that we do here, the modules we do here, we are of course talking about business. And we're talking about real life. And a lot of situations in real life are not quite that simple. Okay? There could be a range of possibilities. Okay? So, inductive is more something like where you analyse what's happening in Tesco. Let's use that example again. Tesco's in problems at the moment. And you're trying to get to the bottom of what might happen next in Tesco. And of course, it's not certain, is it? You don't know exactly what might happen next in Tesco. Tesco, by the way, have just fired, about 3 weeks ago, fired their chief executive. Yeah? Gone, kicked out. He was only there 4 years, kicked him out. It was no good. And they got a new guy in from a company called Unilever. He's only been there 3 weeks. He's already suspended 7 directors and 3 have resigned. Were resigned. Okay? Probably had a meeting and the new guy said, well look, you can either resign or I'll fire you. Which do you want? Okay? Having been in business, I'm pretty certain that conversation was had, and they probably said, we'll resign. Okay? So, something went on. Okay? So, thinking about what might happen next in Tesco is not so clear cut as 2 + 2 = 4. Just because they got new chief executive doesn't mean to say that everything's going to be brilliant. Okay, but if you look at his track record and you look at what he's doing so far, he seems to be cleaning things up a bit. Maybe it's looking like he's stopping the rot and maybe he'll stop the nosedive. Okay, whether he's the right guy to bring it back up again, who knows? But it looks like he's stopping the rot. Turns out the previous guy, well, last Friday or Friday before, 2 weeks ago now? Yeah, 2 weeks ago, 2 Fridays ago, it turns out that in Tesco, a brand new £31 million private jet turned up that the previous guy in charge had ordered. Even though Tesco is in profit problems, he'd ordered a £31 million private jet to go with the other 4 that Tesco already owned. A fleet of 5 private jets. What the hell was he thinking? Okay, so it sounded like the previous guy was, you know,
away with the fairies.
Yeah, away with the fairies. He's definitely away with. Well, he's spending more time with his family now, as they say. So that's inductive, and we use this quite a lot. Okay, because in these courses in business, it's not quite so clear. So, relevant theory might not be totally clear or well established. Could have several theories. If you start talking about, when we start talking about organisation and behaviour, we start talking about motivation theory and stuff like this, or the theory of management, theory of leadership. Okay, I think the leader, you're going to be in my ESML class, aren't you? Monday. Okay, management and leadership and change. Okay, so management and leadership. Subject of leadership. Just to give you an idea here, there are over 400 definitions in the academic literature of what leadership is. Now, I don't know about you, if there's over 400 definitions, personally, I would say they don't know. Okay? And they can't all be the same. Some of them are very wishy-washy. Okay? So, this is not as clear-cut as 2 + 2 = 4. There are no other theories about what 2 + 2 equals. It's 4, that's it. Okay? It's not 3. Even as a guy with 2 degrees in maths, I can be sure. 2 + 2 is 4. Okay? So, you might have to sort out which theory seems to fit. Okay? So it's not clear that the theory applies or even which theory applies. You may have multiple aspects to a situation. Just spotted a spelling mistake. A new theory may be discovered, it's meant to say, not discovered. Discovered via the situation. So you might have a situation which no theory is going to apply. The abductive approach, you've got to be very careful with. If you're not careful, you'll be wrong. Now, I thought I was going to be half an hour late this morning. Lucky that I wasn't. Why did I expect to be half an hour late today?
Because you're stuck in traffic.
Because I was stuck in traffic. Apparently. Anybody else?
Overslept.
Overslept. Some of these words up here. So we've got traffic, overslept,
Counting your money.
count my money. Yeah, right, yeah. Couldn't be asked. Okay. Just slow.
Thought you'd miss your bus.
I thought I'd missed the bus. I was just running late. Okay.
You forgot the bus goes.
All right, bus problems. Okay. Now the reason I put that up there as a question is that, firstly, you're all coming up with theories, if you like. Okay. You're coming up with theories, plausible theories as to why I might be late this morning. Now I know why I thought it was going to be half an hour late. And I'm pretty certain it would take you probably an hour to think about why it was. The reason I thought I was going to be late was at 6:30 this morning, there was a power cut for an hour. And I had to sit there in the dark. And as I said to Priscilla, I thought I was going to be late, and I'm not having a cold bath in the dark for anybody. So that was the reason, there was a power cut. Okay? There could have been a million possible explanations. And that's you were using the abductive approach there. I was leading into you to use the abductive approach, which is to guess at plausible reasons why. And all of them were wrong, which I was pretty certain would be the case. Okay? Yeah, it's plausible. Yeah, traffic, that's the normal one. Overslept, pretty useful. You said you're a police officer. You know, the police have got to watch out for this one, because you know, sometimes you get the impression that the police kind of jump to conclusions as to, oh, what's he doing that for? Oh, he's obviously up to no good. Well, he might not be. Okay, so just jumping to the normal conclusion does not mean that you are right, and lots of things could be happening. So that's the abductive approach. Of course, sometimes we have to use this, but we have to be careful with it. We have to test whether our theory makes sense or not. We need a bit more evidence. Okay? Me saying I thought I might be late this morning, I deliberately haven't given you a clue as to why. But if I said I was obliged to sit in the dark for an hour, you go, power cut. Okay, yeah, I've given you a bit of evidence, okay?
It's a prediction.
Sorry?
It's a prediction.
It's not a prediction, it's kind of working backwards. It's kind of saying, this happened, what were the possible reasons that could have led to that? Okay? I won't go through there's a page in here that you can read that goes on about this more, and that says that effectively what it says, you've got the deductive approach, you've got the inductive approach, you've got the abductive. And this is saying A leads to B for sure. This is saying that A leads to B maybe. But the abductive is saying that B was caused by A. It's going back the other way. Okay? And of course, this could be A1, A2, A3, A4. Okay? It's as different as that. So you've got to watch out when you're trying to find explanations for things. Like, why was the chief executive of Tesco fired? Guess, okay? But you really want to pick up a bit of evidence there that might, you're not going to get the correct answer unless you work there, unless you were in Tesco. But you can probably narrow down the possibilities. It wasn't because he was ill, okay? So, and things were going wrong. So, The newspaper said he was fired, and I've got no reason to suspect they're lying. So we can use the abductive approach there. What do we do next? Okay. There's a page called exercise, which is called exercise. It starts off in Lebanon. Okay? You can find it. Put the mic on. So, what I'd like you to do, not very long, I'd like you to have a read through this wonderful article. And after you've read through it, you can discuss it with a colleague or something sitting next to you. What I'd like you to tell me is, what's it going on about? What's it about? And I'll write some other questions up here.
assume they're facts.
Jim? Well, question 3, do you think it's mainly facts? I'm asking you. Right then. Would anybody like to tell me what this is all about? What's the point of this?
About the archaeology, the previous many times ago, how these impossibilities work. So
what's it about then? Archaeology.
yeah, ancient.
Ancient archaeology, apparently. It's about. Anybody else?
Technology.
It's about technology. Okay. Anybody else? What's it about?
I think it's like theory. If people were able to make these things before, and if we could admit it, or if it's just something which we can't explain, and how they get these results in the past.
So stuff we can't explain.
Yes, I agree. It's a theory that something has happened when it couldn't happen. Before it was discovered. Something was happened before it was discovered.
It's about aliens. It's about aliens. This article is trying to convince you that aliens visited the Earth. What it says.
Yeah.
Clear. Near the bottom. Since we are not prepared to admit, except for admit there was a higher culture and equally perfect technology, so he's saying, he's kind of saying, it didn't come from us. All that is left, the only thing that we can possibly say, so this is abductive reasoning, is the hypothesis of a visit from space. Is what he says. Explanation. He's trying to convince us that aliens visited the Earth. That's what it's about. You've got to be careful when I deliberately chose this to be a bit tricky. That's the point, okay? If it said, yesterday I went to the chip shop and bought some chips, and I said, what's that about? You say, well, it's about buying some chips. You know, so it's bound to be a tricky one. So, who wrote it? What kind of person wrote this? Do you reckon? From the style of it? Newspaper. You think it's from a newspaper? So a journalist. Okay, so you think it might be a journalist?
It's possible because I don't think it's something that is that educated to come up with a conclusion like that, unfortunately.
You don't think he's very educated? Okay.
Philosopher.
Philosopher. Okay, philosopher, okay. Who do you reckon?
Researcher.
A researcher?
Yeah, who researched an alien or...
Okay. What kind of research? Like scientific researcher or an archaeologist or scientific? Okay.
Mathematician.
A mathematician? You reckon? I'll tell you who wrote it. It was one particular guy called... So it's spell his name right. Yeah. Eric von Daniken. Science fiction writer. Basically, who tried to make out that he was a researcher. Actually, he was a science fiction writer who was trying to make a lot of money of writing complete nonsense books. This is an extract from a book written about 1969 called Chariots of the Gods. It wasn't very thick, but about this big. The whole thing was about alien visitors, and it was a bestseller because so many people were taken in. Let's look at this in a little bit more close detail. There's ways to read. There's skim reading, where you just sort of look through it. Yeah, I mean, I skim read it because I've read it before. Okay, I'll just re-familiarise myself with the kind of stuff he's going on about. The other possibility, something that I personally do if I'm really trying to be critical, it's very slow, it's called dense reading. Dense reading is where you don't move on until you are absolutely sure of everything that's being said. Be very slow. Let's do some of that. We'll not do it for the whole thing, because we'll be here the rest of the day. I mean, we really have to do that. In Lebanon, there are glass-like bits of rock called tektites. Are there? Is that a fact? He's put it down as a fact. He might be lying. He might have made it up. Okay? In 1969, it might be difficult to check that. Nowadays, what have we got the advantage of? The internet. Wikipedia should sort that one out fairly quickly. So you could Google that, so you could soon find out, are there glass-like? There might be rocks called tektites. I'm not definitely sure that they are glass-like. So it might be partially true, and it might be partially nonsense. But if you say glass-like, it makes it look like more factual because you put more detail in it, okay? In which radioactive aluminium isotopes have been discovered. Ooh. So what? So bloody what? You know, there's radioactive rocks around. You know, I'm sure that. So, what do we take from that? It's either a fact or it's not. And if it is a fact, I'm not sure it's got much consequence. I certainly don't see what's got anything to do with aliens. In Egypt and Iraq, there were finds, you don't know who by, say, where there were finds, using the passive voice, of cut crystal lenses, which today can only be made using cesium oxide. In other words, an oxide that has to be produced by electrochemical processes. What have you got to say about that? Is that an impossibility that he claims? An oxide that has to be produced by electrochemical processes. What's an electrochemical? Is anybody at all scientific here?
Shall we?
What's an electrochemical process?
I'm not scientifically minded, but it sounds like a chemical process where electricity is used.
Yeah, which is basically any chemical process. Because if you actually know anything about chemistry, you'd say that chemistry is an electrochemical process. So where he's saying that this oxide has to be produced by electrochemical processes, well, yeah, because that's how oxides are produced. You know, that's like saying, I've got this match and I strike it on this box and it burns. And the result, when it's gone out, is an oxide. And that's produced by an electrochemical process. And it's like, well, what we did, so what, yeah, of course it is. That's what went on. All oxides are produced like that. So what? Say nothing. There were finds of cut crystal lenses, which today can only be made using cesium oxide. Okay, cesium oxide you might not know, you might want to go and check it out. Cesium oxide is used for polishing glass. Has been used for polishing glass for many years. When I was a kid, I had some cesium oxide in the bag. And I had this, when you've got stones, okay, you put these stones in a round thing on an engine, and it goes around and puts some water in there. And you put some cesium oxide in there, and you leave it for a week, and you come back and they're all polished. Wow, okay? Well, there was no aliens involved, believe me, okay? Just in a cup, okay? So, there were finds of cut crystal lenses. Yeah. I've got a camera at home. That's probably got some cut crystal lenses in it. And if I can't find my camera and I suddenly find it, I can say there were finds of cut crystal lenses in my house yesterday that could only be made using cesium oxide created by yeah, so what? It doesn't tell you when these cut crystal lenses were found, it just says were. The temptation is to think he means thousands of years ago. He could have been last week. He doesn't tell you. Oh, by the way, I might be lying anyway. In Helwan, not in Afghanistan, in Helwan there is a piece of cloth. Wow. Who said they came from Afghanistan? We've got cloth in Afghanistan?
Yeah.
Yeah? Wow. Incredible. It says in Helwan there is a piece of cloth. That stunned me. A fabric so fine that today it could be woven only in a special factory. Not just any factory, special factory. What kind of a, with great technical know-how and experience. Not just any know-how, but great technical know-how. Well, I'm sure there is. I mean, do you have fine fabric? Do you think in Helwan, even today, there might be a bit of fine fabric that was made in an advanced factory somewhere? Yeah, quite likely. Yeah, I think this shirt was probably made in a pretty advanced. Probably the cloth, it's not handmade because you know it cost £1,000. You know, it's just straight kind of Marks and Spencer's thing. So it was made in a fairly advanced factory, I think. And if I went to Afghanistan and I ripped the shirt and I was in Helwan, I might think, well, I don't want that shirt anymore, I'll chuck it down there. And then somebody comes along, oh, look at this, fine cloth that could only be made in a fantastic factory. Well, yeah. Only with aliens, though. Okay? Absolute twaddle. Electric dry batteries, which work on the galvanic principle. Ooh. Well, that's the principle by which all dry batteries work. That's why they're called galvanic cells. So, of course they work on the galvanic principle, because that's what they are on display in the Baghdad Museum. Okay, so they might be. I could show you some on display in Tesco's. Yeah, dry cell batteries on display in Tesco's even, with a price attached. You can buy, put them back in your radio, whatever it is. They are dry batteries working on the galvanic principle in Tesco's or Sainsbury's. It's not much of a museum though. The Baghdad Museum has got a couple of batteries on display. Look, we've got batteries. I'm not too impressed by that. He doesn't say anything about thousands of year old batteries, does he? He's inviting you to add that bit. He's leading you along. Okay? I'm not going to go through much more of that because you can tell the way this is going. He's talking with technical term, he's talking what we say is bollocks. It's rubbish. Okay? He's put a few facts in here and a lot of completely made up stuff, which, by the way, when he was interviewed afterwards, he admitted, he said, well, yeah, you know, to make it believable, I've got a few facts in there, embellished them, and the rest are just made up. I'm trying to sell a book. I'm trying to make a lot of money by writing science fiction. What do you expect me to do? If you're stupid enough to believe it, what's your problem? Yeah, I wrote it, you know. This strange medley of impossibilities. What do we mean when when we put inverted commas around things, what does that generally mean?
Not really.
Yeah, it's a question. So this strange medley of impossibilities, so he's saying there may not be impossibilities. Well, that's not saying much, is it? I'll give you a good example of using inverted commas to question the truth of something. So there's this guy coming up to his 18th birthday, okay, and he doesn't know, but he's adopted, okay, and his parents are thinking when he gets to 18 he really ought to, you know, we need to tell him that he's adopted, he's not really our son. But we want to break it to him gently. Don't want to just come in, you know, it's a bit hard to sell somebody, you know, all these years you thought you were our, you know, son, but not really. So what they decide, they decide to get him a birthday card, and on it says, "Happy birthday, son," in inverted commas. I think that should break it to him gently. So you think, what do you mean, son? Okay. What do you mean, son? What do you not actually have son? Okay. So yeah, so it's obviously a silly joke. But so when he puts inverted commas around impossibilities, he's calling into question the idea that these impossibilities are actually impossible. I think plainly that these impossibilities we're not sure about should make us curious and uneasy. He's telling you to feel curious and uneasy about it. Well, apparently all this is to do with aliens, apparently, because he says, since we are not prepared, he said, we are not prepared to accept or admit there was a higher culture. So he said this, he basically said there's three possibilities for all these things. Either there was a higher culture, or there was a perfect technology before our own, or there was a visit from aliens. So is that the only three possibilities? No, it might be, there might be another possibility. He's lying. Okay? And a few other possibilities as well, but actually the truth is, it's low rubbish. You've got to be careful when you read stuff, okay? Especially, don't read, if you read the Tesco's corporate report or McDonald's, one of the assignments I ask people to do in operations management is McDonald's, is look at McDonald's. And I ask people to say, what's McDonald's strategy? What I don't like is when they go onto the website, find the McDonald's web page, cut and paste what McDonald's says on page 1 about what they're all about, just put that in the assignment, that's the strategy. Yeah, who's been to McDonald's? Yes? Everybody? On their website they claim that they sell the highest quality burgers, nutritious food.
Oh my God. Really?
That's what they say.
That's on their website?
Of course it does. Well, they're not going to say, we sell rubbish, we sell, you know.
What about the
let me tell you something about McDonald's, okay? Right? No, it's not because I've called this into question, it's because it's a quote, more or less. We use 100% beef in our burgers. Do they? You don't think they do? They'd get sued if they didn't.
Yeah, they do.
They do. They
But
definitely
the burger doesn't have to be made of 100% beef.
Perfect, exactly. Of the beef that they put in their burger, 100% of that beef is beef. The rest of the stuff in the burger that isn't beef doesn't apply to that. So legally, they will have had it checked out, legally this is true. What is it actually telling you? Next to nothing. You know, of the 1% of the burger that's actually beef, okay, that's beef. Oh, by the way, what is beef? Could it be cow's eyes? Cow's ears? Yeah. Well, it's not anything else. It's not pork. Okay. Yeah. It's beef. Let me say that it's, you know, nice red Aberdeen Angus meat. Okay. Yeah. 100% beef. 3 eyes. Okay. And these 3-eyed cows that we buy. They got done. McDonald's got done last year in the States. Or rather one of their suppliers got done for taking meat that was unfit for human consumption because it was off, treating it with ammonia to kill the bacteria, and then selling it to McDonald's. Everybody suspects that McDonald's knew, and McDonald's have started to go off the boil in America. They've lost something like 2.5% market share. The heavy suspicion is that, you know, certainly in the States, they're just feeling that maybe McDonald's aren't quite so high quality as their website claims that. So, be critical. Be critical. Okay.